So I think, I think people just, people have trouble getting their minds around how scholarship has developed since the Enlightenment in ways that has made advances possible. Not just in sociology, which is Berger's field, or in the social sciences, but in the sciences themselves. Why didn't people before the 18th century develop the kind of scientific views that led us to put a person on the moon, or that made my dishwasher, or that that like allowed me to to go to the dentist without? I mean, how did these advances happen? They happened when scientists decided that they were not going to try to understand everything in light of their philosophical and religious perspectives. They were going to see what happened in the world. And when they saw what happened in the world, they're going to just bracket why it happened that way. They're just going to see what happened, and is based on empirical observation. And this goes back to like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton and stuff. It's like, once you do that, I mean, Newton was perfectly well a Christian, but his Christianity had nothing to do with his law of gravity. He observed things. Well, historians started developing the same mindset at the same time. We're going to bracket what we personally believe. We're just going to try and figure out what happened based on the empirical evidence. And once they did that, they made great leaps in understanding the past. Somebody who has a Christian worldview and insists that Christianity is the exception to the rule is breaking the rule. Even if you are a Christian, if you're going to do history, you bracket your faith commitments in order to study the past. And so it's, all the time I get accused of having an anti-supernaturalist bias because, oh, you don't allow for miracles. And it is not an anti-supernaturalist bias. It's how the discipline works. There are millions of historians, and many of them in this country, and many of them are Christian. But when they do history, they don't import their beliefs into it. You cannot have a resurrection without there being a miracle, which means that God intervened in history. And there's no historian on the planet who's a bona fide historian who talks about God intervening in history. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I want to complicate this a little bit because, many of our colleagues, some of the greatest scholars today studying early Christianity are practicing Christians. A lot of the greatest scholars today of Second Temple Judaism are practicing Jews. And I've actually found that a lot of scholars of contemporary paganism happen to be contemporary pagans as well. So I don't want this to be too simplistic. So what do you make of that with, practicing Christians being excellent scholars? Their faith commitment doesn't necessarily negate their scholarship.
Yeah. Well, just to do the analogy with science again, I mean, if you're a chemist or a physicist, it doesn't matter whether you're in China or in Iraq or in Canada or in Peru. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your nationality is, what your faith commitments are, what your philosophy is. If you're doing science, your chemistry is chemistry. It's not based on whether you're a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. It's just, there's not Muslim chemistry. There's just chemistry. And real historians try to think of it that way with history too. There's not Christian history and Jewish. I mean, there's history about Christianity, history about, there's not different methods. And so historiography is a major field of research. People study, how do you study the past? And there are, of course, disputes about it. And there are different schools of historiography. But there are not schools that say, outside of people who insist on pushing their own faith commitments, there are not like schools of history that say, oh yeah, that's one of the valid approaches, that everything has to agree with the Christian faith, everything has to agree with the Muslim faith. And so bracketing means you look at what you can demonstrate as having happened on the past based on criteria that other historians agree on. And so you analyze the data apart from requiring somebody to have your faith commitment to agree with your analysis. And that's just what it means to do history.